Finding ways to gain exposure to growing emerging markets can be difficult for the investor. One way is to buy into companies that are listed in established markets. Myanmar Strategic Holdings is anticipating admission to the main market here in London. The founder and chief executive is Enrico Cesenni, and he joins us now with some more.
Thank you, sir.
Good day to you. First of all, what is Myanmar Strategic Holdings?
Sure. Myanmar Strategic Holdings is a diversified operating company focusing on Myanmar and focusing on consumer sectors, predominantly hospitality and education. In hospitality, we have 4 hotels, mainly boutique hotels in Bagan, Mandalay, and Lil Lake. And in education, we operate the Wall Street English franchise in Myanmar, focusing on English language for adults.
Okay, I want to get on to the Myanmar side of the story in just a minute, but I want to talk as well about this listing in London. As I said, it's a good way, I know, for investors to get into companies that have exposure to maybe areas of the market that might be a little bit more difficult to approach. So getting a listing through London is an interesting point. You anticipate a market cap of, I think, around about $23–24 million, and I think you're hoping to raise just over $4 million. Explain a bit more about why you're approaching the London markets and what you hope to get out of it.
Correct. I think in general, listing adds transparency and liquidity to an already attractive market, which is Myanmar. Effectively, our goal is to get investors exposure to the Myanmar story the same way it was done in Thailand by Manor International and other consumer-focused companies. We have mainly high-net-worth individuals from Europe who kindly supported us until now, and we're building an institutional shareholder base for Myanmar Strategic Holdings in the future. Our plan is to grow the company substantially, and we feel there is an opportunity to really grow the investment in Myanmar across hospitality and education and other consumer sectors. Hence why we decided to approach the capital markets and raise funds in the open market.
What's on the balance sheet at the moment in terms of cash? Because you're going to add, as I say, something like just over $4 million to that.
Sure. Well, in terms of cash, we raised some of this money already in the form of a convertible. Right. So as of March, with $4.5 million there, I guess we're going to end up in the roughly $5 million plus range. We expect to invest a portion of the money into growing hospitality and education, so roughly $1.5 million. Another $1 million will be dedicated to new initiatives, and we expect the rest to be working capital for the company.
Let's talk then about Myanmar and where you're investing that money on behalf of shareholders. Myanmar itself has not got a particularly good impression as far as the place to go for money, because it's dominated by the military still. There's got many decades of unrest. The central bank doesn't seem to have too much of a defined strategy. It's got very weak finances. Public purse is very small. What is it about Myanmar that you like to see and you think is of benefit to investors?
I think it's undeniable that Myanmar is a long story of non-democratic government. On the other hand, I would say that for the past couple of years, you had already a democratic government, and even the previous military government was very business-friendly and really tried to drive Myanmar into the future. From a political perspective, the market already opened up quite significantly in terms of being democratic and giving free speech and free press. Internet was widely spread already quite a few years ago. In terms of what's attractive about the market is that the base from which Myanmar is starting is extremely low. So you're starting from 1/3 of the GDP per capita compared to Thailand, 1/2 of Indonesia, and there's a long way to catch up. I guess anecdotally, you're looking at a market where 3 years ago you didn't have cell phones, and now basically you have 3G or 4G that's better than London. You can stream movies on iTunes or Netflix everywhere in Myanmar today. So what we see as an opportunity is really investing in the country, building the consumer sectors, and giving investors exposure into a rise in disposable income and ideally discretionary spending in the end. There are 2 ways we're doing that. One, on the hospitality side, we are taking advantage of the fact that the market is opening up and effectively is attracting more customers from abroad as the country gets more connected to the rest of the world. From the education side, we look really at discretionary spending and how people are investing in education, which is one of the key means to build the soft infrastructure of the country.
Yeah. What about the approach that the government has got towards companies, and especially foreign companies coming in and doing what you're doing? In terms, first of all, about the relationship you have with the business ministry, if you like, in Myanmar, how good is that at promoting it as a good investment place?
I would say the relationship has been very good. I would say the government has been very open in terms of listening also to suggestions from the business community. I would say we meet the government on a quarterly basis, discussing policy and discussing the practice across ASEAN, but also across the rest of the world. In terms of incentives, they give incentive to foreign companies to come and invest in Myanmar. And of course, there are some sectors where they give more incentive than others. And I would say education and hospitality are two of them, where actually maybe in mining and natural resources, they would rather concentrate more on their own companies rather than on foreign companies. Overall, I would say business practice has been quite friendly. And I would say everybody is aligned towards building further the country.
What about the taxation rate, the corporate tax rate you have to pay when making profits on the how does all that work?
Correct. I mean, in Myanmar, you look at roughly 25% corporate tax rate, and you have a 5% sales on tax, which is really meant, to tax the money at the source.
So that's a revenue tax. That's
correct.
5%
That's revenue tax. That's revenue tax on any total revenue of the company, and 25% on the bottom line. The government has been starting to enforce this policy across local and foreign companies at the same time. There are some incentives for foreign companies operating under the MIC Act, whereby you can get up to 5 years of tax-free incentives, effectively.
How far through that period are you?
We decided not to go for this MSC permit, but we're actually operating under the traditional Myanmar Company Act framework.
Why didn't you go for that?
I think usually it takes a little bit longer to get approvals, and our focus was really to establish stronger foundations. Also, in terms of what we do typically doesn't require approvals, and we tend to operate an asset-light strategy, while the MSC permits typically tend to favor an asset-heavy strategy, so investment above $10 to $20 million.
Okay, we spoke a little bit about the cash you're going to have on the balance sheet that you're offering to investors. What about the long-term payback for investors in this business, those that want to buy into the IPO? What are you saying to them in terms of how they're going to get a reward out of all this?
Sure. I guess in terms of our payback for each of the investment, we're looking at payback of the investment of 2 to 3 years, usually. So it's a fairly short payback on each of the investments. The company itself is already revenue generating. We're already generating profits, management fees really across all the different businesses that we manage. And any investor who will invest in the company will effectively get exposure to the growth in revenues and the growth in profits of the company. In terms of hospitality, we recently appointed a CEO called Daphne Yuen, who comes from the hospitality background in Thailand, used to manage a portfolio of $1.5 billion for TCC. Which is a local conglomerate, and she's in charge of growing our platform in Myanmar. And on the education side, we appointed a CEO called Mark Nusom, who used to be the CEO for Wall Street English Thailand, and he's effectively in charge of growing our platform, similarly to what was done in Thailand.
And what's your background?
My background is in M&A. I used to do M&A at Goldman Sachs and before Lehman Brothers, focusing first on financial institutions and then consumer retail.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting story, and congratulations and good luck with the listing.
Thank you very much.
When you come to the main market here in London. That's Enrico Cesenni. He's the founder and chief executive of Myanmar Strategic Holdings.